Here we are with another season of Precure, and boy howdy do I have a lot to say about it. Before we dive into the show proper though, I want to first take a look at some details about the production of this iteration of Precure. A lovely commenter on the last video flung some information my way, which I shall now relay and attempt to expand upon. Apparently, the previous season killed the concept of Precure sequel seasons, as merchandise sales and ratings were abysmal, and the fate of the franchise was riding on the success of fresh Precure. Old staff left and new creators took up the helm, tasked with making Precure great again. When looking at sales and ratings, the most readily available source of information I could find was this very Japanese chart. Having only taken one semester of a Japanese class, I can't exactly translate most of this. I can tell you that it displays weekly and overall TV ratings for Precure by season, and up until fresh Precure, Go-Go definitely had the smallest numbers, which lends credibility to the idea that fresh Precure was meant to be a reboot of sorts. I was also unable to find any press releases or interviews from staff members confirming that Fresh was meant to revitalize the series, but given these numbers, that seems to be a likely scenario. What I do have, however, is a list of staff on each season made readily available on MAL and ANN. Having combed through the staff lists on both sites and scratching my head at a few contradictions and ambiguities between them, I've compiled for you a handy-dandy chart of the most prominent staff members on each season, and from here we can see that the change in staff this season is quite noticeable. The first two seasons of Precure were made by mostly the same people. A shift in staff did occur between Max Heart and Splash Star, but it wasn't as large a shift as the one between Go-Go and Fresh. The 3 seasons preceding Fresh were all helmed by the same director, Toshiaki Komura, who was previously an episode director on the first 2 seasons. One might even say that when the Splash Star shift occurred, the series was still helmed by someone entrenched in the ideas of what Precure had been up until then. The shift between Go-Go and Fresh was much more noticeable, but you may need to look beyond the director to realize that. Sure, Junji Shimizu hadn't directed any previous season, but he did direct the 2 Max Heart movies and the Splash Star movie, on top of being an episode director for both seasons of Yes 5. Additionally, co-director Akifu Mizako had been an episode director since season 1. The credit for series composition, or the main writer behind the season, is where the shift in staff becomes apparent. The credit goes to Atsushi Maekawa, a complete newcomer to the Precure franchise, known for series composition on The Prince of Tennis, and would go on to do the series comp for the first 58 episodes of Hunter x Hunter 2011. Going by his credits, Maekawa is not at all lacking in writing chops, and since Fresh was his first involvement with Precure, he had an opportunity to bring about the much-needed change. On top of him, a few other scriptwriters made their Precure debut this season. Another change of note is the music credit. Each of the previous 5 seasons all featured music composed by the same dude, Naoki Sato, who is prolific in his work if nothing else, having also scored for all this other stuff I found listed on Wikipedia. Fresh marks his departure from Precure, and he was replaced by YASUHARU Takanashi. That was a change I could tell occurred just by listening to the music in the show, because unlike every previous season, the soundtrack of Fresh was one I actually took note of while watching and kind of liked. Like Maekawa, Fresh marked Takanashi's first time working on Precure. Toshie Kawamura was a prominent staff member on every previous season, credited on all as character designer and animation director. She even did some key animation. She's still around this season, but only as an animation director. Character design duties were handed over to Hisashi Kagawa, also an animation director, whose other credited works include key animation and animation directing on a metric butt-ton of other anime. This was not the first time Kagawa had worked on Precure, having first done key animation for the Max Heart movies. However, this was his first time in a prominent role in the production of a season of Precure. Between the directors, writers, character designer, and new composer, the staff behind Fresh Precure was a mix of old and new faces, but with enough new faces to make the staff list stand out from the previous 5. Based on this staff list, one could expect to find a mix of new elements to make the show new, along with old Precure tropes to reassure longtime fans that yes, this is still Precure. Did they accomplish that, or did they lean too far in one direction? I'll spoil it for you now, it was a balanced enough mix, though I'd argue it ultimately ended up leaning old. But whatever, let's dive into the show proper and see how this season tried to make Precure fresh. Now, this is a story all about how a children's cartoon went all upside down. I'd like to take a minute, just sit right there. I'll tell you how I slowly came to think that the show was alright. The opening episodes of Fresh Precure are by far the weakest opening episodes of any season of Precure thus far. While I did eventually start to have fun with the show, I can't ignore the fact that the first few episodes were dull at best and irritating at worst. I was apprehensive from the opening scene of episode 1. The very first thing Fresh Precure presents us with is some truly ugly background art. I thought, that's not very fresh. In fact, it couldn't be less fresh if they dug up a child's drawing from a preschool's dumpster. This was especially jarring coming off of the previous seasons, which featured a stylized simplicity in its background art, which I'll take any day of the week over this. Soon after, we're introduced to 3 of 4 of the main cast, Miki Ono, Inori Yamabuki, and the main character, Love Momozono. Yes, you heard that right. Our main character's actual real name is indeed Love.
Cheers, love!
In case you don't get why that's weird, let's do a quick comparison with the names of all the other main characters in this franchise. Nagisa, Honoka, Hikari, Saki, Mai, Nozomi, Rin, Urara, Komachi, Karen, Kurumi, Miki, Inori, Love. Here's what's really weird about this. This season's main character has an English word for a name, but that word itself is not actually a name. Aside from being the 41st most popular boy's name in Sweden, just about 0 people in the United States have Love for a first name. I say about 0 because SSA.gov doesn't seem to know anyone named Love, but for all I know there's someone who lives off the grid named Love or something. But discounting that, among English speakers, no one is named Love, at least not as a given name. So why? Why is the main character of a children's show given a name that's a word in a foreign language and is not itself the name? To be clear, I'm not asking the in-universe reason why she's named Love. In this show, her grandfather wanted to name her for the concept of love, but didn't want to go with the Japanese ai because the English word is more universally known or something. That's stupid. Hey viewer, would you name your child Ai because you wanted her to be loved in Japan? No? That's what I thought. That stuff is all whatever. I want to know why the creators thought giving the main character a non-name in a foreign language was a good idea. It feels very out of place in comparison to all the very Japanese names of every other main character, and unless the goal is to teach Japanese kids the meaning of a single English word, I can't think of any good reason to give her such a weird name. Can you imagine if Love ever made a trip to the US? I'm sorry, miss, your name is what? To be fair, after a while I did get used to her name, but that's not because it stopped being weird, but rather because I was stuck with it for so long that my options were either to get used to it or go insane. I'm not entirely sure I didn't do both. The other weird thing about the first episode was Love's first outing as a cure. This outing contained a new development as of yet unseen in the Precure franchise, which had me intrigued. Up until the moment Love first transformed, she acts like you would expect any normal person to in the situation she's found herself in. A monster's attacking and she's really scared, she tries to fight it off because she's brave, but it's been made clear that she has no idea what she's doing, nor does she know what's going on. Then she transforms into a cure, something she had no idea would happen by the way, and suddenly, without saying anything, she's able to handily destroy the monster like she's a professional who's been doing this for years. That's weird, right? There's no precedent in the series for the transformation to imbue the girls with new knowledge or anything. They've just always been the same girl who suddenly has magical powers and a new costume. So what's with Love suddenly acting like a completely different person while she transforms? At the end of the episode, after Love is back to herself, she says, out loud, this is something the series has never done before. This episode suggests that in this season, the transformation actually turns the girls into different people, that the cures and the girls are 2 separate people who share the same body. That's an interesting, new, and unexplored concept, and I was curious to see what the show would do with it. For that brief moment, I really did think Fresh Precure was going to live up to its name by having this fresh take on the cures themselves. But if you've been paying attention to the way I've constructed this section, you've probably already guessed where this is going. Incapable of following through with an interesting new concept, Fresh Precure quickly drops it, and for the rest of the show, the cures are all portrayed like they happen in every other season. That is to say, the girl and the cure are one and the same. They couldn't even stick with the concept of the cures and girls being separate people for one episode. By episode 3, all the girls have gotten their transformations and are acting like themselves when transformed. I'm disappointed that the show didn't stick with what would have been its one unique feature to make it stand out from every other iteration of Precure, and I think it's weaker for it. For the next 10 episodes, things didn't get much better. In fact, as Fresh dragged on, I was only getting more tired of it, fearing I'd have to make a video about how this was the worst Precure ever. Episode 12 comes on, and I'm still pessimistic, and this stupid villain's plan. What the hell? Did I just oh god. This episode is fun. I'm having fun, guys! I'm having fun! Episode 12 took me off guard, to say the least. The whole cast, all of whom previously came off as one note, was suddenly teeming with life. Their personalities bounced off each other in fun ways that drove home a sense of true friendship between the three for the first time in the season, and they were animated with a liveliness that hadn't been seen before, not just in this season, but in the whole franchise. Occasional bits of nice character animation did pop up in the series prior, but not enough to be noticeable. Then all of a sudden you get episode 12 of Fresh Precure and you're looking at stuff that looks like it belongs in a Sakuga AMV. After finishing that episode, I was so shocked at how big my stupid grin was, at how much I had been laughing along with the characters, at how much of a good time I was having, that I had to take a peek behind the proverbial production curtain. What do I find but the fact that this episode was the first one of the season directed by Rie Matsumoto. Previously, I was unaware of this name, but commenters on Mal sure weren't. Matsumoto is apparently known for this sort of high-energy expressiveness, and boy did that shine through in episode 12. It's no exaggeration to say that her directing alone reinvigorated my interest in Fresh Precure, as hers was the first episode that truly did feel fresh. Thankfully, it was mostly uphill from there. Soon after, Akifumi Zako, another Precure veteran, was brought on to co-direct the season, and Fresh Precure stabilized at a higher level of enjoyability. The characters became fun to be around and laugh with, and a fleshed-out, serialized narrative began to take root where previously there had just been repetitive, episodic nothingness. Thanks to this sudden spike in quality, I can say that Fresh Precure did manage to succeed in breathing new life into its franchise. Well, there's also the ratings jump from last season to prove that Fresh was a success, but I'd like to credit the new-ish staff who, after floundering around for 11 episodes, got their shit together and put out an actually fun show with likable and expressive characters, kinetic fight animation, the whole 9 yards. Speaking of the main characters being fun and likable, I should probably go over them at some point. I've already introduced the main trio, so now let's talk about them a little more in depth. First, Inori Yamabuki, aka Bucky. Well, actually, her friends call her Buki, but I'm calling her Bucky, and there's
nothing you can do to stop me.
Bucky is a unique main character within the Precure canon, not personality-wise, mind you. In that department, she's fairly standard. She's nice and somewhat reserved, and she cares about her friends. There's nothing new there. How she's unique is in her upbringing, along with a particular personal quirk. Bucky comes from a family of veterinarians. You'd think this would make her someone who deeply cares about animals, and you'd be right, with one tiny exception: she's deathly afraid of ferrets. Problem: the cute animal friend this time around looks an awful lot like a ferret. Weird, right? Someone who cares for animals being afraid of an animal. The why of that is where this gets interesting, where Bucky becomes immensely relatable. It turns out that when Bucky was a little kid, a ferret bit her and she's been afraid of them ever since. Personal anecdote time. Almost the exact same thing happened to my child self, just without the ferret. Way back when I was little, me and my family would often take a walk to a local park, at the back of which was a pond where ducks gathered, and we would feed the ducks. One time when feeding the ducks, I held up my hand with food in it a little too close to the ducks instead of tossing the food, and a duck bit me, and I have hated ducks with a fiery passion ever since. They're evil! Evil, I tell you! Yeah. Thus, when it's revealed that Bucky can't stand ferrets because one bit her a long time ago, I can't help but relate super hard. I can look past the rationale of her fear seeming silly because I know it's real. I realize my hatred of ducks is wholly irrational, as is Bucky's fear of ferrets, but we humans aren't a rational lot. Her feelings are irrational, my feelings are irrational, but no one can tell us we're wrong. Because I'm able to relate to Bucky over a thing that seems silly on the outside, but to us means so much, she feels like one of the most human characters Precure has ever produced. Moving on, we have Miki Ono, who's notable for being full of herself. That's not hyperbole, her catchphrase is, "No, you're not." Shut up. Despite being 14 years of age, this girl has already started a modeling career, and that raises far too many questions. Questions like, why? Why is a 14-year-old girl modeling? Is that a thing? Holy shit, that is a thing. Huh. Learn something new every day. Well, far be it from me to be morally judging people for their career choice, or judging the people who hire and enable them, but isn't this a sort of job that should be, I don't know, an adults only thing? And is it really a sort of glamorous career you want young girls to aspire to? Aren't there more productive careers a show like this can put forth and inspire its audience to strive toward, like a doctor, perhaps, or an artist, even a teacher? Just a thought. Also, why is Miki's dream being a model? The show didn't do a good job explaining that. In fact, I don't think Miki was ever given proper motivation for modeling, and if she was, the show did such a poor job communicating it that it failed to latch in my memory. Or my notes. Given that motivation is one of the most important lenses through which we view and understand a character's actions, Miki's lacking of one makes her feel incomplete. It's hard to gauge what this character is thinking or feeling at any given moment. Hell, it's hard to tell how much modeling really means to her. There's one episode that undercuts Miki's modeling thing by having her choose to run from an important audition because her friends need help in a magic fight. That only further drives home the confusion. What does modeling mean to Miki? As it stands, we'll never find out. Without clear motivation for doing what she does, Miki can't help but be the weakest of the main cast. Lastly, our primary protagonist, Love Momozono. The leader of the group, Love is the loudest, most energetic of the bunch, and frankly, there's not all that much unique to her as a Precure lead that we haven't seen before. The most interesting thing about Love is the characterization she doesn't have, perfectly highlighted in the first episode. In it, she's introduced as a matchmaker. Her introductory scene sees her helping two Randys to hook up. It's heavily implied that this is not the first time she's done this, that she's known for pulling this sort of stunt. This has the effect of setting up Love as a unique protagonist within the Precure canon, someone who sticks her nose into other people's business and helps love to blossom, characteristics that were either not present in any other Precure character, or there but not given any focus. However, much like the concept of the cure and the girl being different people, Fresh Precure seems unable to stick with new concepts, as Love's introduction is quickly forgotten and made irrelevant to the rest of the show. It might as well have never happened because nothing ever comes of it, which is a shame because no new characteristic or facet of Love's personality ever turns up to take its place. After episode 1, Love goes from being a matchmaker to just another cure. The best I can say for her is that at least she's a competent leader, but beyond that, nothing about her stands out or makes me care. Between the three, I can't say any of them hooked me as strongly as the cast of YES5. Love, Miki, and Bucky were all perfectly serviceable, and they had decent chemistry, but nothing that grabbed me as hard as, say, Komachi struggles with writing. Nothing outright bad here, but nothing exceptional either. At best, pretty relatable. At worst, But wait, you may be asking, aren't you forgetting someone? What about that fourth cure all over the promotional material? Well, hold your horses, I'll get to her, but first we must discuss... Fresh Precure features the overall strongest set of villains in the series thus far, though no individual is the strongest villain of the series. I don't mean strong as in how powerful they are, I mean strong as in how well developed these villains are as characters. This season features a good number of baddies, and while they're not all equally interesting or fun characters, the few that are go a long way toward making the show's simple good versus evil conflicts just a little bit more complex. But before we talk about the villains themselves, let's talk about their actions on an episode-by-episode basis. Reflecting on previous seasons, I find it weird how Precure villains have always been a nebulous threat to anyone but the Cures themselves. Whenever the villains would summon monsters in any previous season, the show would go out of its way to make sure no one was in the immediate vicinity, or that the Cures themselves quickly got to them and they were passed out anyway. Previous villains never came off as serious threats because they rarely, if ever, attacked civilians, only the heroes. That changed in Fresh Precure, and that change is for the better. The villains go out of their way to target the normal denizens of the town the Cures reside in, which makes each attack of theirs that much more threatening than in any previous season. Even better, all the attacks go beyond a simple big monster going smash that every other season has relied on until now. In this season, every monster is unique in both design and fighting style. Since their ultimate goal is to do doomsday by collecting sadness, one monster makes people sad by erasing things they like, and another gives everyone wigs. I'm sorry, it's still funny. This variety of monsters and attacks goes a long way toward making each fight distinct and exciting. The fights, by the way, are better than ever. I've said this before, but with each successive season of Precure, the fight animation and choreography keep getting better and better. There were multiple moments in this show where I was in awe of how cool this was, and the show accomplishes this both through kinetic animation and simple cool poses. Like, holy shit, did you see that? Love, you're a badass. But now that I've rambled about how the villains do the villainy, let's talk about them as characters. Fresh Precure introduced its villains in order of intrigue. The most complex and interesting villains it introduced first, and each successive villain introduced was less and less interesting until you got to the big bad, who, like a lot of Precure big bads, wants to rule the world, or in this case the multiverse, because he's evil, and that's it. The big bad is dull because for 48 of the show's 50 episodes, there's nothing to him beyond being evil, and I would never be able to remember his name if his more interesting lackeys weren't always repeating it ad nauseum. Mebius! The show attempts to compensate for its villain's dullness in the second to last episode with a twist about his origin, but it's a twist that falls flat. Turns out that Lord Mebius is a supercomputer built by people with the intent of bringing order to their world, but he gained sentience and got a little out of hand. Oh boy, a rogue AI. I've never seen that before. And even if Lord Mebius being a rogue AI technically makes him more of a character than being evil for evil's sake, suddenly learning the interesting part in episode 49 doesn't make up for the previous 48 episodes of him being a generic, dull, big bad. I'm not saying Lord Mebius is a huge mark against the show, though he's certainly a blight. His presence through the majority of the series is virtually non-existent. He's usually just a name and only comes to real prominence in the last few episodes. Lord Mebius being dull isn't the end of the world, though not for his lack of trying. All I'm saying is, for someone who has such a large influence over a significant portion of the cast, we could have done with him being a little more fleshed out, and a lot earlier. Just below Lord Mebius on the evil totem pole, and just above him in terms of not totally sucking, are his lackeys Klein and Northa, though they're not much better. Klein is wholly forgettable, and the only noteworthy aspect of Northa is that she is by far the creepiest villain Precure has ever produced, but aside from that, there's nothing to her. That leaves us with 3 villains that I like: Wester, Solar, and Ys. 3 might not appear to be a whole lot, but remember, up until this point we've had at most 2 interesting villains per season, usually 1, and occasionally none at all. Now, of the 3 good villains, Wester holds my undying admiration. At the start, he comes off as the most generic, big, tough guy possible, but as the season progresses, he gains so much personality that he might as well be a completely different character. A phenomenon also known as character growth. I'm not exaggerating when I say that Wester is one of, if not the most, expressive characters in all of Precure. And he's not expressive just for the sake of being funny, though his variety of goofy facial expressions does provide for much amusement. Wester's expressiveness is the method through which we experience his growth as a character. As someone who is an alien to the world he's living in, the crazy reactions he gives to even mundane parts of life show how he slowly comes to appreciate the world despite his initial goal being to help conquer it. His friend Solar goes through a similar, though more low-key arc. Though he puts on a cool guy show, sparks of personality do occasionally slip out of him. He and Wester both get to have their subtle growths come to a head at the end of the season, when they get to redeem themselves and fight with Precure, and I was smiling the whole time. Last but certainly not least is one of the franchise's greatest villains, Ys, aka Setsuna Higashi. Setsuna is a callback to previous Precure villains Michiru and Kaoru from Splash Star. Michiru and Kaoru were a pair of villains who disguised themselves as normal people and infiltrated the lives of that season's cures, pretending to be their friends until they actually were. Also, they were the best part of Splash Star. Setsuna is basically all of that with a couple of key differences. Some for the better, some for the worse. The biggest problem with Michiru and Kaoru, which I shamefully didn't mention in the Splash Star video, is that there wasn't enough of them. They were only introduced in episode 14, kind of killed off in episode 23, and were absent until they were brought back in episode 42. Despite being the best part of that season, they weren't around for a lot of it. Setsuna, in contrast, is around for the whole season, introduced in episode 1 and sticking around until the end of episode 50. Where Michiru and Kaoru only got to team up and fight with their Cure friends in the last 5 or so episodes, Setsuna becomes a Cure herself in episode 23 and fights alongside the others for the rest of the show. In theory, having this much more time with the villain turned good guy guy allows for the show to further flesh out both her as a character and her relationship with her teammates. But in practice, this is where this season starts to falter a little, especially in comparison to Michiru and Kaoru. A consequence of Michiru and Kaoru being given less screen time than they deserved was that their growth across each appearance was more tightly paced and purposeful. The signs of their development were clear enough that when the time came for them to switch sides, their change of heart didn't seem like a sudden plot twist, but rather a natural development. This is not so for Setsuna. Quite the opposite. Her change of heart and becoming a cure is paced and presented like it's meant to be some major plot twist, and it's a twist that fails on every level. For one, it was incredibly obvious from episode 1 that she was meant to be the fourth cure. You can see people calling it as soon as the show started airing. But more importantly, her change of heart doesn't work because it doesn't have the careful buildup that Michiru and Kaoru got to have. You got to see those two slowly come to the realization that what they're doing sucks through the various kindnesses of their cure friends and witnessing the natural beauties of the world around them. But Setsuna, the show wasn't willing to flesh out her character enough to have her change of heart make any sense, just for the sake of having a twist that everyone could see coming. So as a result, her entire character in the first half of the show can be summed up in one word: mad. She spends all her time mad at the cures and only gets madder as time goes on, and gives no indication that she's willing to change her mind or anything like that. As a result, the obvious twist of her switching sides falls flat, wholly unearned. Setsuna's transformation into a cure may be poorly executed, but everything after that's a lot more fun, and it's where the show's take on the villain turned good guy has the edge on Splash Star. Where Michiru and Kaoru were gone for a lot of the show and didn't get to hang out with the cures much after they converted to good guyism, Setsuna spends over half the show being friends with and hanging out with the main cast, essentially becoming a main cast member herself. Some of the best parts of this show consist of Setsuna learning what it's like to have friends, and through them, learning to express herself and have fun. Shout out to episode 26, where Setsuna learns the fun of being indoctrinated into a dance cult. Oh shit, did I not mention the dancing? There's a lot of dancing. Throughout all of Precure thus far, the identities of the cures have always remained a secret. Hell, their mere existence is usually a secret. The point is, no one ever knew this girl or that girl was running around saving the day as a magical fighter. Fresh Precure challenges this convention and almost succeeds. Almost. Not quite. Every previous season, to its detriment, would strain its believability for the sake of preserving the status quo, that being that no one knows who the cures are. Almost every time a character was in danger and the girls needed to transform, that character would pass out at just the right moment so the girls could transform without exposing their identities. This happened constantly in every season. All the damn time. No hyperbole required here. Characters pass out at just the right moment so the girls can transform so often that if you were to make a drinking game out of it, you would be hospitalized. The consequence of this one thing reoccurring so often is that it started to shatter my suspension of disbelief every time it happened. Like, really, every time they're about to be discovered, the person just so happens to pass out? Come on now. Because this happened so often, it made me question why the show was bending over backwards to maintain the status quo, and moreover, it made me want that status quo to be altered. Why not let them be discovered? That'd make for an interesting change of pace, wouldn't it? After all, up until now, it's been over 250 episodes of the same thing. Couldn't hurt to shake it up a little, right? Wrong. See, Fresh Precure finally had the courage to shake up the status quo like I wanted, but like in how it previously maintained the status quo, it bent over backwards to make this change in the worst possible way. The first thing wrong with how Fresh Precure handles this is that the reveal of the identities of the cures happens at the end of the show. In other words, they're revealing their identities doesn't matter at all. Because their identities are revealed just as they're about to go off and fight the big bad in a multi-episode finale, there's no chance for the show to explore how revealing their identities affects their daily lives. Therefore, they might as well have not done it in the first place. This is a thing that should have happened in the middle of the show. After all, secret identities exist because having them exposed would be a source of conflict. If you're going to expose a hero's identity, why not explore the consequences of that action? How does their families knowing what they do affect their heroic outings in the long term? Or now that the baddies in government know who they are, will they show up at their doorstep? You can see a whole web of consequences branching off from this one point of identity exposure, but Fresh Precure explores none of it. Instead, it's a one-off moment with no bearing on the plot as a whole except to incite some seriously stupid drama. When it comes to stupid drama, in comparison to every other season of Precure, Fresh is by far the worst offender. I have rants I could go on about some of the more asinine examples sprinkled throughout the season, but I think it's all best summed up by the stupid family drama that arises when the Cures reveal their identities. The setup is as follows. Episode 45. The big bad has attained his goal and the apocalypse is happening. The Cures are about to go off to save the world, but first they decide to reveal their identities to everyone because, okay, actually, that's a whole other tirade I could go off on right now. It was not communicated clearly why the girls felt the need to reveal themselves. Additionally, it accomplished nothing, and everyone would have been better off if they had just gone off to fight without a word like always, but I shall refrain from elaborating for the sake of brevity. Ahaha. But that's not what's really stupid about this scene. No, what's really stupid is the reactions of the girls' parents. Now, to a certain extent, I could understand and sympathize with the parents freaking out and worrying about their kids' safety and all that. Suddenly finding out your teenage daughter is a superhero who's been saving people for the better part of a year, and also the only hope to save the world, would naturally spark a little shock in anyone. But how it ends up going down stretches the realm of believability a bit too thin for me to hang on to. The parents freak out at first, which is fine, and the girls say they're off to save the day, which is also fine, but then, and keep in mind that the actual apocalypse is happening at that very moment around the world, the parents say, "No, you're coming home, and you're grounded," while the adults have a conversation about this, and the girls just go along with it. Fucking what? Okay.
What are you, fucking stupid?
You lot, look here. I get it, okay? You're worried about your kids. That's natural. I can't blame you for that. But look around you. The world is ending. And to your knowledge, it's an indisputable fact that the only ones who can stop it are your daughters. And you put them in timeout like they're a bunch of toddlers! I know your kids growing up and putting themselves in danger for the sake of others can be scary, but when the others we're talking about consist of the entirety of humanity and life in the multiverse as we know it, don't you think that takes just a little bit more priority than you asserting your authoritative parenting over your daughters? This isn't being a concerned parent, this is being completely insane! I'm not mad because, oh no, the girls are being held back by their parents. Will they ever be able to save the world? No, I'm mad because these parents, who previously have been shown to be reasonable enough characters, have had their brains sucked out of their skulls to make them stupid enough for this forced drama to occur. When drama occurs for no reason other than characters acting stupid beyond belief, it only ever makes for a frustrating viewing experience. Watching this, my eyes weren't glued to the screen because I was enthralled with the drama. I was rolling my eyes, thinking of how lovely it would be to beat these people to a pulp with a baseball bat, whilst politely inquiring as to how they can be so devoid of common sense. Why? Evil parents. Why? Want to kill. Why?
You're destructive.
Evil is just destructive. Storms are evil, if it's that simple. Did you really feel so bad because killing him feels so good?
I like killing her.
To close, like always, it's time to move on to the obligatory coverage of this season's filler movie. Watching this season, it occurred to me how silly of a practice it's been to dedicate whole sections of these videos to filler movies when they really don't matter at all. None of them are canon, and none of them have ever changed my mind about the series they're stapled to. That's not to say they can't be enjoyable, just that there's little point in giving them any sort of focused attention when they're basically only long episodes that can be skipped without missing anything. To prove to myself how little they matter, I wrote this whole video without having watched the movie alongside the series. And now that I have watched it, I can safely conclude that everything I just said was on point. Fresh Precure's filler movie is just that. Filler. It didn't matter at all. It didn't change my perspective on the rest of the season, so why bother talking about it? Not to say that I couldn't. Oh, hell, does this movie have some weird moments I could milk, but still, nothing about it is a proper reflection of Fresh Precure, so spending any more time on this movie than I already have would be meaningless. Not to mention this video is long enough as it is, so no need to add on filler of my own. So I won't. And I won't go over any other future Precure filler movie again without damn good reason. Never again. Ooh, I feel like feel like I'm forgetting something important. And that's all I have to say on Fresh Precure. Well, not all I have to say, but this video's long enough already, and if I were to keep going, I'd never get this video out. The characters of Fresh may not have connected with me like the cast of Yes 5 did, but it had enough raw fun to more than make up for that deficiency. Not to mention, it succeeded in revitalizing what was apparently a stagnating series, so I guess we have this season to thank for Precure going on forever. Speaking of which, the next season is holy shit, Heartcatch, finally! I started this journey in part because I wanted to watch Heartcatch, and I'm nearly there. This better be worth it, goddammit. Anyway, thanks for sitting through my extended ramble about a children's magical cartoon show. If you've got something to say, which, well, be honest, after sitting through all this, you probably do, please leave a comment. I do enjoy reading them. And besides, what was the point of making this whole thing if I can't wrangle a little discussion out of it? If you like this video, stick around. I can't promise the next Precure video will be out anytime soon, but I should have some smaller videos out relatively soon. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you later.